Indian No More. Chapter 26. Umpqua Always. When Daddy and Mama got back from the hospital, our friends in the neighborhood gathered at our house. Miss Elsie comforted Mama, then she hugged me and Pee-wee tight, cried with us, and told us how Chich went to heaven. Keith didn't know what to say. He stood in silence, rocking slowly back and forth on his heels. Addie went over to hug Pee-wee, wailing with her. Mr. Hernandez and Mr. Bates stood by the television, talking in lowered voices with Daddy. Neighbors started bringing us food. Mrs. Hernandez brought us ropa vieja. Even Mrs. Garner, who pretty much kept to herself, came over with streuselkuchen. Everyone seemed to feel as awful as we did. Not quite 2 days later, I heard a loud sound rattling outside. I ran to the window and saw Cousin Harlan's pickup truck in front of our house. Clad in a plaid shirt, faded blue jeans, and logging boots, he jumped out quick to help Aunt Rosie get out of the cab. They gathered food out of the pickup bed and headed for the front porch. I ran out to help. From your family, Cousin Harlan said to Daddy, handing over the bags as they came up the front porch. Figured you needed some real food. Daddy took the rest of the bags and handed one to Pee-wee as we went back in. The three of us set them on the kitchen table and peeked inside. Jars of huckleberry jam sat among the dried salmon and deer meat. Cousin Harlan hugged Daddy for a long time. Mama hugged Aunt Rosie. Then Pee-wee and I got hugs from both of them. Aunt Rosie didn't waste any time. You need to bury her in Grand Ronde, she said directly to Daddy. We can't afford the expense of having her sent up there, he said matter-of-factly. She has to be buried there. Then her spirit will wander. Cousin Harlan cut in. I could just wrap her up and throw her in the back of the pickup. No one would have to know, he offered. Seriously, Cuz, we can take her home. Daddy had a slight smirk. Cousin Harlan always knew how to lighten up a hard situation. You need to bury her in Grand Ronde, Aunt Rosie said again. Her spirit will wander if you don't. Daddy had already gone to St. John's Catholic Church, where we'd attended Christmas Mass, to arrange Chich's funeral mass. I had heard him talking to Mama about figuring out a burial site in Inglewood. The funeral mass has already been arranged for tomorrow, Daddy said, and it costs too much money to take her home. Aunt Rosie studied Daddy. I don't know what has come over you, but we're your family. We're here to help. Once you're from Grand Ronde, you're always from there, no matter where you live, how far away you go. Now, we'll have the funeral mass tomorrow, but then she needs to go home. Our cemetery is still ours. That's where she belongs. Daddy didn't respond, but I could see him mulling it over. A knock at the door interrupted the discussion. Mrs. Hernandez was back to take us girls over to St. John's to pray for Chich. When we got up to the altar, I pushed a penny into the box next to the row of candles, picked up a stick, and lit a tiny candle. Pee-wee and I stood nearby as Mrs. Hernandez knelt and said her prayer in Spanish. After we got back, Keith stood outside our house. So are you guys going back home? My mom said you are. I just stared at him, not sure what Miss Elsie and Mama had talked about while we were at church. I am home, I said. Chich is gone. Even if we get to take her home, how could I ever stay there by myself? As soon as I said it, I knew it was true. 58th Place had to be home. At least for now. I no longer dreamed of Spirit Mountain every day or playing with my cousins in Yamhill Field. No sense in dreaming of something that couldn't come true. Now there was no one to continue teaching me how to be Umpqua. I felt numb and incredibly lost. The feeling continued through the funeral mass the next day, and back at our house where everyone gathered to eat. Mama and Aunt Rosie cooked some of the food. We served venison stew, Portuguese bread with blackberry jam and sausage. Miss Elsie brought over a baked ham and sweet potatoes. Mrs. Hernandez brought arroz con pollo, and Pecking's restaurant delivered a lot of food too. The adults sat in the house, talking and eating. Us kids ended up taking our plates and sitting outside on the front porch, but I couldn't eat anything. By the time the sky grew dark, everyone headed home. We were all exhausted. I brushed my short hair and crawled into bed with Pee-wee. Aunt Rosie slept in Chich's bed. Sometime in the middle of the night, the front door lock jiggled. I lifted my head to listen. After a few minutes, the door opened. Footsteps staggered through the living room into the kitchen. Deep mumbling echoed. Something crashed in the kitchen, some cursing. Then the back door slammed. Curious, I slid off my bed. I crept through the dark living room and into the kitchen. Quietly flipping the overturned chair upright, I scooted it over to the window. I knelt on the seat and pulled away the window curtain to peer outside. The full moon shone down. Scattered toys in the garden hose sparkled under its light. The walnut tree glowed. Daddy, with his arms at his sides and head down, stood in the middle of the lawn. He was saying something. Is he praying? I strained to listen. A song traveled from the backyard. A familiar song. I-I-O, Daddy sang, and he moved to the beat of the song. He stepped twice on each foot, his arms extended out. He twirled, he danced like they did back home, the old way. You should be in bed. I whirled around. Cousin Harlan stood behind me. I hadn't heard him come inside. I went back to watching Daddy from the kitchen window. I didn't know Daddy knew the honor song, I said. Of course he knows the honor song, Cousin Harlan said as he peered out over my head. He's Indian, after all, and will always be Indian, no matter how hard some of us try not to be. I want to stay Indian, I said. You will, but I don't have the res to go back to. I don't have Chich. I don't have my tribal number. So? So those things make you Indian. Regina, you were born Indian. Our family is Umpqua. Nothing changes that. Not the government, not these city people, not even that old waitress who wouldn't serve you. Daddy must have told him about that. I glanced back at the backyard. Daddy was still singing and dancing. Think I'll join him, Cousin Harlan said, hanging his black jacket over one of the chairs and walking to the back door. By the way, we're all taking your Chich home tomorrow, and your ma is going to have a baby. Then he opened the door, winked at me, and left. Wait, we're really going to take Chich home? And Mama's going to have a baby? I wondered if Chich had known. I stared out the window. Cousin Harlan and Daddy moved to the beat of their song, wailing in unison. Hopefully we could still have this traditional giveaway and all the singing for Chich like we did for Choop. And Chich was right. We came from survivors. Our ancestors survived from being forced to leave our homelands and march to Grand Ronde in the winter. Her mother overcame the loneliness and abuse in boarding school to return home and grow her own family. We had left Grand Ronde with 5 family members. In the end, we'd still had 5. I stared out the window again. Daddy was Indian. He wasn't hiding his heritage. He wasn't pretending to be something else. He knew Chich needed to go home and decided to make it happen. And I knew when we returned, Daddy would drive to work wearing his black pants and tie, believing he would be accepted someday. But tonight, I thought about all I had been through. What had Chich said once? All that you had experienced, whether won or lost, was yours. I was Indian even without my braids. I was Indian even if I didn't own a headdress or a pony. I was Indian even if I was Indian no more, because I knew where I came from, because I knew my Umpqua ancestors, and because I survived to tell their stories, and mine, like this one.